What's up, Pandudes? Peter von Panda here. Hey, you know what it is? It is kind of a momentous day. One that I wasn't actually sure would come, even just a year ago. And I'm kind of excited that it's here, and I'm sure it's one that you've been waiting for. If you're a Fiat 500 fan, you'll recognize this Fiat 500 Pop as my 2012 Pop that I bought new. And I want to give you my 6-year update. I will be honest, I didn't know that this was going to come, and this is probably going to be the most interesting update of them all, because obviously as the car gets older there'll be more issues. So I kind of want to go through a lot of stuff that's happened in the last year, kind of amazing stuff, not amazing stuff, and we're going to start with the most mundane first. So it's going to build up, so there will be some incentive to stick around with me here. But I have the windows rolled down, just FYI, because it's hot out here and I'm going to jump in the car and I didn't want it to scald me. So we'll kind of cover it all, and I'll kind of tell you about the future and what are my thoughts on it, etc., etc. So one of the things that you may remember in my last update, I said I don't know if there's gonna be a 6-year update or not. Well, obviously there is, and the reason that there is that I kind of came to a decision, one that I wasn't thinking that I might. 6 years, I've got about 67,000 miles on this car, which you may say is about average. The interesting thing is a lot of those came on early. You wouldn't have known. About 6 months ago I actually switched jobs and actually took a job that's much closer to my house, and so now my commute is less than 15 miles a day, which is really nice. It's nice on the car, and that kind of sold me on kind of re-upping with the Fiat. And so saying that, it's a great commuter car, it's great mileage, it's easy to park, it's easy to drive in traffic. And the one thing I was thinking about is you kind of doubling down on my Cadillac CTS and making that my daily driver. I love that car. Had higher mileage. It was a little older though, and I thought, I might as well stick with the car that's been pretty reliable, younger, lower mileage, and for a commuter car, it's great, and I kind of like it. But there was the problem of old car familiarity fatigue. Let's call it like car owner fatigue, right? You just have driven the same thing and you just want to change a scenery. It's like dating, right? And what I realized is that, and this is going to be kind of a money hack for you peeps out there, is that you can do some things to your car to kind of get you out of the fatigue issue. Give it a kind of a newer car feel and kind of rejuvenate that love you had with the car. And so, even if you pour in some money, which might not make financial or mathematical sense on a car, you can kind of bring back that feeling and kind of prevent yourself from actually having to buy a much newer or more expensive car. So obviously the big thing I did, and I did a video on this, is I got some used Fiat 500 sport wheels, which I really loved. I bought them used, got them online, ended up having them sent here. I did a video on installing those myself, had some new rubber put on them, and I think that has changed the look of the car. In fact, when I go out to this car now in my parking lot at the end of the day, I'm just kind of giddy because, man, it looks so much better with those wheels. I love the color. The style and the body style differences between the Pop, the Sport, and the Lounge were all pretty subtle, so a lot of people don't even notice that. But I can really tell, with the wheels on there now, it just gives the car so much better look. Going from a 15 to a 16-inch wheel in general is going to make it look more aggressive. But these particular wheels, I think, were just spot on in terms of design for fitting the 500. Now, one of the things that I will say is that you should be able to find these wheels fairly easily, but I was almost tempted to go on TireRack.com and buy a set of new wheels, aftermarket wheels, with new rubber on them and have them delivered, but I didn't do that. I kind of really like the stock look. I thought it looked good. Now, the other thing I was thinking about is maybe a color change. I do really like the Grigio, the gray, but I was thinking of maybe going from the belt line up, like having it wrapped in a gloss black or even a matte black, although I think the matte color scheme is a little bit lame now, kind of worked out. I do like the decal, and that's where I want to show you here that it is coming up. I've mentioned this in other videos. Still haven't done anything about it. It is literally 6 years old. I'll take you around to the other side here and show you that it may be even a little worse over here. But, at a glance, you can't tell. You can kind of see it a little more there. It's kind of peeling away. It will probably come off pretty easily, but honestly, for an aftermarket decal set that I bought on eBay back when I bought this car, 6 years in sun, harsh winters, etc., etc., I think it actually looks pretty darn good. So maybe I'll do something with that, and a wrap would certainly kind of change the color. Now, the last thing that I wanted to do, and man, I really want to do this, but I just can't justify it right now, is change the seats. So I have in this car, as you probably know, a cloth seat. It has like a vinyl at the top and then a cloth on the bottom. Now when I bought it, I had no regrets. You know, the color was fine. And actually the material I thought was actually pretty good for a cloth seat, much better than some of the other seats in some other cars, you know, particularly like the Korean cars and the GM cars. But it's just kind of old, and the gray is just kind of a little dowdy. And so what I really wanted to do was either, it really comes down to two options, because these have airbags in them too, is either get seats out of another 500 and swap them in here. So the ones I definitely like the most are from the 500 1957 edition that were kind of an all brown. Now the lounge had a version that was mostly brown, and then this upper portion was like a cream white, which I wasn't as crazy about, but it's kind of the only way to get a brown. I kind of wanted a color change on the seats too, and for me, I always liked those Audi TTs when they had like that baseball glove leather interior, you know, a dark gray or a black Audi TT with that kind of cinnamon brown red color, and so that always I just loved it. I just thought the dark color of the car and then kind of that bright but rich color of like distressed cowhide looked great on these types of cars. Now so you can do that. The problem is you're probably going to be about $1,000. You know, seats are going to be about $600, $700 a pair out of a used kind of parted out car. And then for most people, they're going to have it shipped, and that's going to be $300 or $400. So you're probably all in at $1,000 to do a seat swap. Now, the other thing I found, the other option I found is leatherseats.com, and I would love to pick up a set. They actually have something called a brown mitt leather. And so what they will do is they will sew you a replacement cover, top and bottom, and you'll have to take out your seat. You'll have to remove all these covers, and then it'll be a replacement. So literally, you're gonna have to take off these. You're gonna have to disconnect the backing, I think. You're gonna have to use the connections underneath, you know, the little hooks and the I think they call it like a C-clamp or something on the back to kind of hold everything in place. They'll even give you some covers for the headrest. They do them to the original factory pattern, so the fit should look factory. They call it a custom look with a factory fit, and from what I've seen, they do a great job. They actually did like the Clarion NSX, so they certainly have some companies that do restorations and customizations that use them, and so I think, you know, it looks like their work is second to none. And they can actually do diamond stitch, perforated. That would also be awesome. I'd love to do perforated, but you can kind of pick the leather that you want and even the pattern that you want, and I was really impressed with that. And from a price standpoint, I actually think they couldn't be beat either. Now, there were a couple of European places, because obviously the 500 is popular in Europe, that would also make it, but I just didn't know about ordering from something where the website's main language is not in English. Now, I didn't order it, and the reason there is because the seat kits, which usually include both front seats and then the back seat, you know, when I priced it out for this car, it was about $800, so it's pretty pricey. Now, the leatherseats.com, it looks like it's worth it, and you know, $800, and then to have a do-it-yourself project versus $1,000 for official OEM Fiat seats that you're going to replace and still have to do on your own. You know, it seemed like the cost advantage was there. I mean, it seemed like there was a little price advantage, and then you could get exactly the leather and the look that you wanted, as opposed to kind of making a compromise and going with something that's already in another Fiat, you know. So there's some creative things if you want to go with the Fiat, you know, the Gucci seats and the GQ seats, if you can find a wrecked one. So I haven't done it, because $800 for seat covers just to change the look is a lot of investment. It's a lot of time. It's probably going to be a weekend project, my guess, and you know, it was just a tough pill for me to swallow. I have not gone to any local upholsterers to try to price it out, because I just don't know that I'm willing to make that investment. But to be honest, like I said, the money hack here is that if you have a car that's paid off like this one, you drive it around, you don't put a lot of miles on it, you take care of it, and yet you're just feeling owner fatigue, you know, dropping $1,000 on seats to kind of get that luxury feel and the leather pressed up against your naked body just might be worth it, man. You know, it just might be worth it to kind of refresh your thinking about the car and put yourself in the car for another few years. And that's really kind of where I'm at right now in my mind, is that I'll probably have this car for a couple more years. That's kind of what I think. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if I could keep it longer than that. But what I think it does too for me is it allows me to look more for a fun car in the future if I wanted to. I could get something that's really impractical and not have to worry about a daily commuter. You know, that this car works really well for that. So leatherseats.com, man, I'd love to have a 50% discount code for that website, but if I ever do that, I will certainly do a video on how these seats come apart and what they look like afterwards. But man, they look good. All right, One other thing I want to tell you, and we'll continue with the mundane, is that this rear tail light, after I took it to a car wash, high pressure car wash, I noticed a little bit of condensation inside the light housing itself. So I know that there's a seal blown somewhere on it. It may be that the connector on the back isn't screwed in. It may just be that, you know, the seals around the light housing are old and have a breach. But I did see a little you know, moisture inside there. Now it's a hot day today and there's obviously nothing there, so it's probably evaporated out. But the fact that I know that there's a seal blown there is one thing I could probably do, is just take the light off and see if I could see an obvious spot where some butyl tape has been worn out, or gasket has been worn out, and just kind of fill it in with some silicone. The other thing that you could do is just get new tail lights, right? And so if you were going to do that, you could replace these with like a blacked out tail light, like from the Turbo. I think that would look great. I don't have any issue with the way these look, but I certainly wouldn't mind kind of going more of a darker scheme. So rear lights here, though, you know, to get a replacement there, even from a breaker, is probably about $100 to $125 from what I can find. So now let's take a quick look inside here. I showed you a video. I put in these Aries floor liners. I've used them for the last couple of years now, and I still have the plastic on top of the Aries logo right there. You know, I just never took it off. That shows how kind of decent they are. You know, I haven't cleaned the floor liners up, but man, they are good. They've gone through a couple winters here. They look good. They were wiped down and vacuumed up. I'll probably show you the passenger one, which would be a little fairer. You know, they still fit good. They're not pulling away. You know, overall, just super pleased, super proud of these products. For about $70, they've really saved my floor mats. Now, the only thing that I would say that I would prefer about them is that I don't know, I wish maybe they had like a fuzzy version so that you'd have like a carpet like feel under your feet, because they do feel a little bit like you're driving, you know, a ruggedized outdoor truck. I mean, right? Because your feet are on the floor mats, and now they're more like mouse pad material than they are like hard, like the WeatherTech, you know, plastic mats. But they still don't have kind of that lush sound dampening effect of true cloth. So I do like those. The other thing I want to show you here is something that kind of started happening recently, and that's my number 2 radio button is kind of peeling a little bit. You can see the 2 doesn't look quite perfect anymore, and that's because the plastic is kind of coming away from the 2, where there's like a little weak area on the number itself. Now that is obviously coming from me pushing buttons and scrolling around. Now I know you can use some radio or steering wheel mounted buttons to do that, but this is something I've noticed in a lot of GM cars. It's a little disappointing that it's happening now. I know that there are some solutions out there to buy like these numbers and kind of heat shrink them back on. I don't know that those are ever perfect, but you know, 6 years later, I'm getting a little tiny peeling on my number 2 button. And that's the only button I can tell, which is funny because the number 2 isn't even the station I listen to the most. It's obviously number 1. But maybe there is a little peeling on the number 1 too, now that I look at it. Kind of that serif at the very top of the one, maybe it looks like it's peeled a little bit. So, you know, kind of keep that in mind. I know I'm nitpicking, but we're getting to the bigger stuff. Now, one of the bigger things here. So let me see if I can fire this up. One of the bigger things, and it was kind of a strange event, and it only happened once, but I came out to my car like this, fired it up, and I was leaving work, and you can see right there, 67,169 miles. So I have a lot of miles on the car for sure. Probably less than the average driver though, so kind of keep that in mind. Now, one of the things that happened is, so I fired it up, and the LCD portion, right, went crazy. It actually was working as I was driving. It was showing the right time, showing the right speed, etc., etc. But it was, as I took on this video, you know, just kind of a little random. It was like the power supply to it was inconsistent or something. It never got better on the drive home, but when I did get home, I turned the car off and turned it back on, and no problem. It kind of came back to the way it was, and it's never happened again. So I don't know if it was a power issue. It was also in the winter, so I don't know if the weather was a factor, the cold was a factor, but it's never happened again. And I was actually worried, because I'm out of warranty now, that I was actually going to have to buy a new instrument cluster. So that only happened once, and I'm grateful for it. The other thing from a maintenance perspective I will say is that November of this last year, November 2016, at 61,000 miles, so 6,000 miles ago already, I did have new brakes put on, pads and rotors. I bought them, took them to a shop, and they installed them. And it was pretty cheap and it was pretty quick. Now, I wasn't getting any squeaking and I wasn't having any problems with like pulsing brakes or fading brakes or anything like that. But at 61,000 miles, I just thought, geez, I gotta be needing new brakes at some point. So I just had them put on. Like I said, normally the eek of a brake sensor is the what kind of inspires me to do it. But in this case, I just did it at 61,000 miles and you know, I've had no brake problems with these brakes. Now, the other thing I will say about both the OEM brakes and the brakes that I installed, which were ceramic pads on standard steel rotors, is that the brake dust issue hasn't been that bad. There's absolutely brake dust, you know, grabbing the tires and put them on. I was able to see that, but you know, for whatever reason, it doesn't bleed out over the rims and the hubcaps, especially on the steel wheels, because you have a steel wheel and then the hubcap. But even on these alloy rims, they're not that bad for whatever reason. So just keep that in mind. Now let's go under the hood of the car and show you kind of the big news. So under the hood here, I don't know if you remember in Chicago here in December 2016, you know, around early December, we actually had an event happen again called the polar vortex. It happened last winter too, and it's just this really Arctic cold air. You know, it could be, you know, I think it was like -7 degrees or colder. And actually what ended up happening, and this was about 64,000 miles on my car, just FYI, what ended up happening is I ended up having to work out of town. So I drove to O'Hare Airport and I parked in the long-term parking lot, okay, like a lot of people will do. And I was gone Monday through Friday, and this car sat outside uncovered in the uncovered long-term parking lot because I'm cheap. And you know what ended up happening is I came home, was really worried because that whole week we did the polar vortex. I came home and it was very cold, fired the car up, and the car fired up fine. And actually what I noticed is that the worst thing about it was the shifting initially is really hard. Bang 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 on the shifts. You know, a cold transmission like that in extreme cold shifts very hard. But what ended up happening is I drove home and I got back here and I noticed that because there was snow on the ground that I had these little pink drops following my car, especially as I was kind of going slowly pulling back into my driveway, that I had little pink droplets in my snow. And my first thought was, yikes, I blew a seal in the transmission or cracked the transmission housing. That's what happened in the cold. Those hard shifts did that. It's transmission fluid. And I was worried nonetheless. So took it to the dealership and they had it for a day or two. And there were two things wrong with it, and the transmission was not one of them. The one thing that was wrong with it is this oil, or this overflow reservoir for engine coolant had cracked, and it had cracked along the seam here, so it's a little bit like a clamshell piece, and so there was a little bit of leakage. I don't know exactly where it was, but that was the problem. Now at that point, the car is 5.5 years old. This is a piece of plastic, transparent plastic, translucent plastic, with very hot coolant. So it gets very hot and then it can get very cold. And assuming that it was just old and fatigued plastic, combined with being super frozen and then heated up very quickly with engine coolant, yeah, I'm not surprised that it cracked. So what they did is they replaced this. This is new, or 6 months old. They flushed the coolant, and and that was that. They also replaced, and I want to say, I thought it was like my breather valve oil gasket or something like that. At that time it was leaking a little oil, so they replaced that too. Total cost to do all that was $350. Now you may be saying, the reservoir is sitting right up here, Pete. You could unhook the hoses and do it yourself and flush it for less than that. Yeah, that's probably right. I mean, this is probably a $30 or $40 piece, right? But I didn't know what it was. It was still polar vortex weather, so I wasn't going to mess around with it and do a garage job on it. But actually, for people who are saying that the Fiats just constantly require a lot of, investment, and who knows what year 7 will be like. But that's the worst thing that happened under pretty extreme conditions. And so the good thing there is $350. I was happy to get out of it with that price. Now, for the most exciting thing, the thing that you cannot predict happened. So this fall, actually early fall, this was before the replacement there, I was driving, cruising happily in the center lane of a big highway. This footage is not the highway, but I was cruising at highway speeds, let's call it 70 plus, on a closed road in Mexico. You know, keeping up with traffic, and it wasn't snowy or anything like that, but I was in the middle lane, you know, fast lane on the left side of me and the slow lane on the right side, and it was rush hour, so there were a lot of cars. Now, what ended up happening is you're cruising pretty fast, and the car in front of me, an SUV, ended up straddling a muffler that must have fallen off another car. So there was a muffler in the middle of the road, and he kind of cruised over it because he had enough clearance, and so I had no reaction time, and I had a muffler right in the middle of the lane. Now, what I did is all I could do is I couldn't veer into either side lane because I would have hit cars. It was just that crowded, and I couldn't have slammed on my brakes because I probably would have gotten rear-ended. So what I did is I just kind of aimed right for the muffler, and I tried to take the muffler right down the center line of the car. Now, the problem was it wasn't just like your average muffler. It was a big muffler. It was not only a big muffler, but it had a long pipe, you know, still the pipe probably from the catalytic converter back, and the exhaust tip, and the whole 9 yards, and I smacked it. I smacked it hard, and I could feel it. Not only could I feel the impact here, and did it kind of shudder the whole car, but you could hear it, feel it, the whole 9 yards, and then I dragged it. So I didn't have enough clearance here. So what I think is that your lowest clearance point is on the front of the car, not the back of the car, and I dragged that sucker for a while. It felt like an eternity, but it probably was, I don't know, 100 feet, 50 feet, I don't know. But at some point, it must have ground the muffler down enough, or compressed it, or lifted up my car, because I kind of leapt over it. I could feel it kind of get under and kind of bang around and then get ejected out the back, and I did clear that muffler. Now, what it ended up doing here was breaking. There's a lower cross member here, which I don't think does a whole lot. I think it's just a structural thing. I didn't actually see it, but I hit it, and so it broke it. Now, I drove straight to a shop because I wasn't sure what I did, or I was kind of assuming the worst. But I drove it to a shop, and he put it up on the lift, and he unbolted. It's only 2 bolts holding this cross member on. Took it off and showed it to me. It was broken in 2 pieces, a very short one piece at one bolt, and then the lion's share of it, a really long piece on the other side, and it was mangled pretty good. And I actually have a little video of a new cross member bar, a Fiat, next to what I have left of the old one, and you can just see, I mean, it has some shape and curve to the bar, but the old one was broken, mangled, and in fact what he said is you can drive with it without it. So he just unbolted it, gave me the old part because it had a part number stamped on it. I found the part, bought it, brought it back to him, and he bolted it in 5 minutes. So it didn't end up being much of a repair. The part itself, that lower cross member part, was about $40 from Fiat, and to have him put it in, he charged me $15. So it was a $55 repair. I really thought it was going to be worse than that. His kind of once over on the rest of the car and the undercarriage said that that's all it did. And in fact, I think you can kind of tell that the front of the car is a really low point. It kind of looks a little bit like a roller skate, some people say. But I think, after I put on these wheels, this car does not look like a roller skate. It looks more like a roller blade. Yeah, badass. All right, now for my last comments on this. One of the things that I was thinking about is, last year when I looked at this car, I thought it was getting about $5,000 or $6,000 used with the mileage. So I kind of was hoping that it would bottom out around there. Now my experience is that this car is getting a little less than that. I know I've seen listings for 2012 Pops for like $6,800. I don't know if those things are selling or not, because that's a tough price point, and some of those only have 50,000 miles, a little bit less than what I've got here. So I kind of think that this car is a $3,000 or $4,000 car, fair market value. I don't know that for a fact, but that's kind of what I thought it is. If it were a $5,000 or $6,000 car, my plan honestly was to sell this and get a 500e, the electric versions, which are coming off the leases from mostly in California and are being sold with the car with low mileage, 30, 40,000, 50,000 miles, with the home charger for about $5,000. And I thought, man, my short commute, my need not to really road trip in this car because I have another car, that would be awesome. I could get out of this car for $5,000. I could buy a 500e for $5,000. I could go green. I wouldn't have to make any stops for gas. I could just charge it up in the evening. And even if I don't charge it up in the evening, an 80-mile range is what the 500e was advertising, would still get me to work and back probably all week long without having to worry about charging. Now, The problem is at $3,000, if that's what I really netted out of it, or let's even call it four, I would still be out of pocket $1,000 to $2,000 to make that transaction happen. So unless there's someone out there with a 500E that wants to straight up swap with me for mine, which I probably would do, I don't think the math makes sense. I may be saying, well, Pete, you're going to drop $1,000 on seats and you're not going to pay out $1,000 difference to get up to the 500E. Yeah, you could argue. I'm dumb, but I guess I haven't made up my mind that I'm going to do the seats yet. I think I'm like 60% there. I just, like I said, the price on it is a little bit of a hard pill for me to swallow at this point. But I really would like to freshen up that interior just for my own sake. You know, it's a money hack to keep enjoying this car completely. So those are all the thoughts at 6 years. Now that being said, like I said, I did the wheels, thinking about doing the seats and everything else, and the car otherwise runs pretty nicely. And so 6 years in, my guess is right now I would drive this car another couple of years. So there might be a 7 and an 8 year update. That being said, maybe someone makes me a deal and the car goes away right away. But I wouldn't be surprised to have this in my stable for the next 2 years and maybe kind of set my sights on finding something a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting as kind of a fun car to do some long-term tests on. But for those of you who have been wondering, do I still have the Fiat? What are my thoughts at 6 years? I got to tell you, I'm impressed with this car. I guess I never thought that when I bought it in 2011 as a 2012 model, that, you know, $17,000 out the door, you know, I was going to be here 6 years later. I can't believe it's been 6 years. 6 years later saying, you know, overall, this car has been pretty worry-free, has been pretty trouble-free, and has kind of delivered on all the things that I was hoping. You know, good gas mileage, nice, easy transportation, you know, easy to park, easy to steer, you know, reliable, and it's been good in the winter. You know, it has been a champ in snow, you know, despite the fact that I live in an area that does plow for the most part, that roads usually don't get too bad. I have been on roads where I have seen cars, you know, most notably, I saw a car, a Mercedes E-Class, it's actually stuck in the road snow that I was not. Now, that granted, that's a rear-wheel drive car, but you know, my Fiat just plowed through the exact same amount of drifted snow without a problem, and so that was pretty cool. That you know, more of the traditional cars were having problems that I was not. So really impressed with the 500. Really impressed with Fiats overall. You know, I don't know what's next on my list, but we'll keep you posted. So I like it. The Fiat 500, 2012, pop. Peter von Panda. Out.